Welcome to the Darkstream, Voxday, voxday.net, and unauthorized.tv. As you can't, we're going to talk about a relevant subject, so I thought that it'd be appropriate to sport the new Sigma game cap. Audio is good, video is good, and if you're interested in picking up one of these Sigma game caps, you can do so at NDM Express, which was flexing today. They were showing they're showing pictures of their new let me see if we can find this here. They were showing pictures of their new oh, I've turned off my there we go. I'm still there. Let me see if I can find this. Okay. Yeah, so this is, what's the settings? Okay, we want voxday.net. Should probably keep one there handy, shouldn't we? Okay. Turn it on. So this is what they have to, this is what they're flexing about. They got a new, they've got a brand new, what is this? It is a brand new, I can't even select this. Anyhow, it is a pallet lift, so that they can drag their, drag all their boxes of Castelia library books around, because War and Peace 2, War and Peace Volume 1 and War and Peace Volume 2 just reached the warehouse, and they're getting them shipped out to everybody, so that's pretty cool. Anyhow, I haven't mastered my switching between things, so we're not going to bother with that tonight. Anyhow, if you've been on Sigma Game lately, then you know, you're aware that we've been discussing a lot of those type of issues. I'm working on getting the book out. Crowdfund's going well. Should be hitting stretch goal 3 probably tomorrow, which means we'll have to figure out what we're going to do for stretch goal 4. If anyone has any ideas, please feel free to share. Pallet jack, that's it. It is a sweet pallet jack, apparently. We have one at the bindery too, but it's not a cool red one. It's a yellow one. War and Peace, you kind of need one because both volumes are in the 800 page range, if I recall correctly. So, I mean, these are big books, and if you're carting around 1,500 of them or so, that's substantial. Anyhow, there's a post today which you would have seen on voxday.net on VP, and it was kind of startling to reach the epiphany that society is facing a major and fundamental choice. And in fact, I think we can now argue with some degree of statistical and evidential support that every society has to address this question in some shape or form. And what that is will the interests and the preferences of men be suppressed, or will the interests and preferences of women be suppressed? And for a long time now, probably 50, 60 years, the general assumption of most people is that it's good if nobody's interests or preferences are repressed. You know, being a libertarian myself, I would have argued for many years that there's no need to repress anybody's preferences. All you need to do is get the government out of the way. Well, that's not correct. And in fact, it's not even possible. and I'm not talking about the government at all, except that that will probably be a mechanism for suppressing somebody's preferences. But I'm talking about this fundamental and unavoidable dichotomy between allowing women to pursue their personal preferences and allowing men to do so. It was all spelled out first in this book by the great Israeli military historian Martin Van Creveld. He wrote this book. We published it years ago. Equality: The Impossible Quest. Full disclosure, I edited this, and it's a really good book. And one of the things that he points out, and he pointed this out pretty much before anyone that I'm aware of, and then he repeated it again in his book Pussycats, which we did not publish, but he published some years ago. He pointed out that men don't like to be involved in professions that women are involved in. In fact, he goes further and says that any profession that women enter in sufficient numbers drives men out. And I think he kind of phrases it in terms of how the profession loses status and that sort of thing. I didn't take it that seriously because, as I often make the mistake of doing, I listen to people's explanations for their positions, and if their explanations for their positions are inadequate, I have a tendency to reject the conclusion on the basis of the erroneous support for it. I finally learned years ago, in fact, it was specifically my mother that taught me that I needed to stop doing that, because my mother is a smart and very astute woman. However, she is a creature of intuition. Logic for her is purely rhetorical. So she would sometimes tell me things that were correct, but when I made the mistake of asking why, she would then offer an explanation that was absolutely and obviously absurd. Now, I didn't realize my grasp of rhetoric and dialectic being much weaker then. I hadn't really grasped what Aristotle was talking about in rhetoric at the time. But once I did, I realized that all my mother was trying to do was come up with some sort of logical ex post facto enthymeme to cover up her inability to explain why she knew what she knew. But, and here's where I went wrong, the fact that she knew what she knew was all that mattered. This is one of the reasons why on Sigma Game, you'll see me often say we're focused on the what, not the why, not the how. Because once you start offering people a why, once you start offering people a how, you give them the wherewithal to try to argue with and ultimately reject what you said in the first place. I can't explain why 2 + 2 is 4. There's a reason why we talk about mathematical axioms. I can't explain the why of many things, but that doesn't change the empirical and observable fact that things are the way they are. And most of the why explanations that we provide anyhow have serious shortcomings and lack explanatory power. Why am I only 5'9" when my dad and all his uncles are more than 6 feet tall? Well, we can theorize. Well, the genetic combination, the genetic inheritance that you have from your paternal side is sufficiently negated by the genetic combination with your maternal side. But even if that's true, that's not really a very useful or even a very relevant answer. Which gene combined with which gene? Was it actually some sort of RNA coded trigger? My brothers are all taller than I am. So there's no why. There's no useful why. Even the why we have is at best partial. Once you ask somebody, or once you tell somebody because, or once you ask someone why, you are essentially asking for or inviting a debate and an argument. Now, I'm not saying that I'm always perfect about avoiding asking people why. Sometimes you do need to know why. As in, why did you do that? Of course, many times that's just a rhetorical question. Why did you do that? It really means I don't like that you did that. But that's beside the point. But the understanding of because is irrelevant. And so in this case, I don't think it has to do with status per se. I mean, I do think that he is talking about a consequence. Once you have enough men leaving the profession and the profession becomes dominated by women. For example, in the example on the post today, we used veterinarians. Back in 1969, 90% of veterinarians were male. As recently, I don't know what the most recent numbers were that they gave, whether it was 2009 or 2019, but it's already around 20% male. And of course, this has completely shifted the way in which veterinarians are regarded. When we used to think of veterinarians, we used to think of all creatures great and small. Somebody who takes care of cows, somebody who takes care of horses. Well, now, most female veterinarians don't want to care for large animals. They're too big and scary. And not only that, but you have to go out to them. They can't bring them to you. And so female veterinarians tend to prefer to work in their own little clinics on small animals like cats and dogs. Which is great for, cat and dog owners. But it's a serious problem when you've got horses and cows and sheep and goats and that sort of thing that don't have enough veterinarians to take care of them anymore. And not only that, but you get into the whole problem of what hours women prefer to keep, how many hours a week they prefer to work, how much money they're content to make, all that sort of thing. But I think the real core reason is that once a field has sufficient women in it, the norms of the field are modified to better suit the female majority. Ironworker Bear says, more and more female ironworkers every year, and they are about as useless as you'd expect. Well, it's interesting that you say that because the U.S. is barely producing iron anymore. what does an iron worker even do? You know, one of the things that Van Creveld points out is that a lot of female work is essentially make work, filling out forms, moving pieces of paper from one place to another. And that becomes the job. It becomes the job rather than the prior purpose of the job. You know, you've got a problem when the purpose of your soldiers in the military and the purpose of the firefighters in the firefighting forces is to move paper from one place to another, because they're not fighting anyone and they're not putting out any fires. And Ironworker Bear, how do these female ironworkers get hired? Who's hiring them? Are they being hired because there are insufficient men applying? Are they being hired out of top-down diversity initiatives, or are they less expensive? Meetings about meetings, consensus-based decision-making instead of decisively taking action. Yeah, those are just two areas. Oh, here we go. Yes, most of the steel is imported now, and big jobs are few and far between. So what that means is that instead of actually working the steel and making the steel, these female iron workers are in charge of buying it and figuring out where to put it. You know, it's a much more viable profession now than it used to be. And so, you know, it's not unlike tech, where if you've got a female engineering graduate or a female computer programming graduate, it usually takes about 6 to 18 months for them to immediately transition into marketing. Sometimes sales, but usually marketing. Because they actually know the material better than somebody who's pure marketing. But it's a lot easier work. I don't know for sure, but I imagine the unions do have diversity initiatives. Yeah, you'd assume so. But here's the problem. Women don't like to work to the same level of detail, same level of performance, same level of precision, etc., that men do. And even worse, they tend to prefer talking about work to actually doing it. Hence the bit about meetings. But it's even worse than that, though, because it's about removing responsibility for performance. Two things that women absolutely hate is decision making and personal accountability. Notice that I didn't say responsibility, I said accountability. You know, if if a woman fails, here's a test for you all. If a woman fails, what's the first thing she'll usually say? I mean, this is practically automatic. Let's see how many you can get this right. You know, see how many of you have female employees or daughters. It's literally one of the first things you'll hear. If you catch a woman failing, what's the first thing she's usually going to say? I didn't mean to, or I didn't try. Close. It wasn't me. No, that's what that's what players say. But again, close. You guys are on the right track. I'll give you a few more opportunities here. Go ahead and just fire away. Ah, there we go. Quiet Thoughts Bear got it. It's not my fault. Yeah, it's really kind of astonishing if you're in management, um, or if you have daughters. Um, One of the first things that you will ever hear every time there's a screw up is, "It's not my fault." I mean, just it's it almost appears to be hardwired at some subconscious level because I mean, it just comes out so automatically. And the way that that manifests once a profession, a job, whatever, transitions into what we'll call feminine mode, the whole system is structured to avoid it being anything being anyone's fault. You know, who's to blame? Society. Who's to blame? The whole company. You know, failure ceases to become personal. And of course, if you have no personal failure, then you have no accountability. Nobody is ever held accountable for anything. This is correct. I mean, you see it in the universities. They've gotten rid of test scores, they've gotten rid of grades, they've gotten rid of tests. Because we wouldn't want to hold anybody accountable for failing to learn, right? We see it in the workplace. It's almost, I mean, if you're in a government job, it's impossible to fire anybody for anything. They don't even have to show up to work. Space Bunny has a friend who has a management position in a government office, and you know, she is just astounded at how little accountability there is. And you know, some of the stories that you hear, you would swear they have to be exaggerated. You know, it's unbelievable what people can get away with not doing and still keep their job. And it's not quite that bad in the corpocracy, but it's still pretty bad. You know, typically, if somebody fails in the corpocracy, then, oh, well, you're just not a good fit for this position. We'll move you over here. You know, but accountability is precisely how you derive performance. If you don't have accountability, you cannot have performance. You definitely will not have excellence. You know, I mean, I had a conversation with one of the Castalia Library guys the other day. He does very good work, but it's just, you know, he was having some performance issues, and it was a good conversation. You know, I think that we've got things more or less sorted out. But one of the things that I made very clear is this isn't satisfactory. You cannot keep doing this and expect to work here. You know, we have certain expectations. You know, we've improved. If you look at what we've done over the past few years, because at the beginning we didn't know what we were doing. You know, one of the reasons why things have taken so long with the bindery is because a lot of what we're doing, nobody knows how to do. People say, well, can't you ask someone? Well, what we've learned is not really. We can ask people who think they're experts and they'll tell us what to do, and then we go down a rabbit hole for a year that was never going to work in the first place. Now we've sorted out just about everything, and so I think we're very, very close to actually going fully operational in all regards, thank God. But it's been a long and painful process. Imagine where we would be if we were doing this with a bunch of people who were incapable of being held accountable. You couldn't do it. You literally could not do it. Sam says that plus the super deltas just let the culture change, end up taking on all the work, and often burn out and leave. Well, yeah, that's a separate issue. Deltas are totally incapable of holding other people accountable anyhow. Deltas only care about their own work. That's one of the reasons why it's a mistake to promote a delta. If you promote a delta, he's probably going to fail as a manager. He just doesn't have the ability to care enough about what other people do. And you can say, well, it's his job to manage the other people. Well, yeah, it's now indirect. Delta narcissism is such that the only person whose work they care about is their own. That's why you see a lot of deltas and gammas in the technical fields, because they don't like to think about anybody else's perspective. They don't like to think about anybody else's work. It's just about me, 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 me all the time. It was really, I think, a major step forward in understanding the SSH once I was able to grasp that it's contrary to what everybody thinks. It's not the alphas who are narcissistic. It's the deltas. And which actually makes a lot more sense now, because everything we came up with about deltas was all positive. Like, the only negative thing about deltas that we thought for a long period of time was that, well, it's just that that women don't properly respect them and appreciate them and be attracted to them. Okay, that's true, but it doesn't necessarily explain some of the lack of regard, the lack of high regard on the social side. Well, now we know. People sense and understand and don't necessarily like the delta's complete lack of interest in anything but his own work, his own perspective. Part of the charisma of the alpha is his empathy. His ability to understand how other people are feeling. Look at Donald Trump, mega alpha, very rich, quite intelligent, and yet he has such empathy that he has the ability to speak like somebody who has about 90 IQ. Think about the level of empathy you have to be able to put yourself in such a position that you grasp the other person's perspective well enough to be able to speak as if you are one of him. That's not just excellence in rhetoric. That's also excellence in empathy. That's why it was so powerful when he said in his 2016 campaign, he said, I will take the arrows for you. He had to understand how the common American was feeling at the time to be able to express that. Sam points out you don't want to work for a guy who can't make a decision and won't go to bat for his team. Exactly. What kind of leader doesn't go to bat for his team? What kind of leader doesn't have empathy for the people who work for him? This is also why Sigmas don't make very good leaders or managers. I mean, the Sigma doesn't even care about his own perspective. You think he cares about yours? I mean, the difference, of course, is that instead of being monomaniacally focused on himself, his feelings, and his own work, the Sigma tends to be maniacally focused on the mission. And so it does work in short bursts, in short periods of time, when it's a all for one for all situation, and people are willing to overlook the lack of pats on the back and scratches behind the ear, and they're willing to overlook the Sigma's lack of interest. Sigmas don't lack empathy; they lack interest. So maybe the Sigma has the ability to discipline himself and act like a proper alpha. I mean, I don't, but there theoretically are some who do. But the main thing is that people are willing to it's an emergency situation, it's a crunch time situation, and people are willing to put up with the lack of interest because they want the mission to be successful. Also, unlike deltas, sigmas don't have problems making decisions. But you can see where, the salt of the earth type, who we respect, who do the best work, are not very well suited for paying attention to what anybody else is doing. That's where you need the bravos. That's where you need the alphas. And none of that, of course, is compatible with the female consensus approach, where someone's in charge but not really, and they won't make a decision, and they won't tell you what to do, and they won't accept any blame for their own actions. It just doesn't work. What man wants to be around that? And here's the thing. I've actually worked very successfully for female bosses. When I was in the corpocracy, I had I had 4 bosses in my very, very short career in the tech industry. 2 of them were male, 2 of them were female. I would say 3 of them were very good. 1 was very bad. I mean, not bad. He was just basically incompetent, pointless. The good guy doesn't really count because I was already at the point where everybody recognized that I just needed to be doing my own thing, and he was willing to let me do that. So I very much appreciated that, and I really liked him. But there wasn't much management going on. What the women were very good at doing, both of them, was being organized. Very organized, very on top of things. But in retrospect, there wasn't a lot of accountability. I mean, and I'm not just talking about myself. Given that I was the son of the owner, you can't really necessarily expect me to be held particularly accountable. I mean, yes, they were told to treat them like anybody else, blah blah blah. But we all know that's not necessarily the case. But looking back, nobody was really held out accountable. If the salespeople didn't make their numbers, it was a tough month. You know, if people, showed up late, then we'd have to talk about it at the Monday meeting. And we only had one weekly tech support meeting, which isn't too bad, but it was long. It was like 2 hours, and they would start it at like 7, and I was finally excused from having to come because I fell asleep in it every single time. In fairness, I was a night owl. This was well known, and nobody resented it because what happened was I volunteered to take the 5 to 7 shift on the phone, 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. shift on the phones, and so then they're just like, okay, you don't have to come in until you don't have to come in until 10. So that worked. And obviously, if you're coming in at 10, you can't go to the meeting. Problem solved, and everybody loved it because the original plan that she had drawn up was, of course, very equal. So basically, everybody was supposed to do their share and work late one night every 2 weeks. We had enough people that I think we had 10 people, so everybody could work late one night, we call them the California calls because they were all from like the West Coast, and so everybody would work and take the California calls. Well, this was a source of much bitching and complaining, and because it screwed up it screwed up everybody's schedules and lives, and so the obvious solution, and this I have to give Carol, that was her name. She was she was an older woman, probably, I don't know, late 40s, and she'd always walk around with these two huge. She had a huge mug of coffee and a huge thing of water. And she must have been like the best hydrated person I've ever met. But anyhow, I got to give her credit. She just said, "Hey, you have a tough time coming in the morning." It's like, yeah. She's like, "How would you like to not have to go to the morning meeting again?" I was like, "I would love that." Because it's embarrassing to fall asleep all the time. Anyhow, she said, "What if you just come in later and then you work until 7?" I said, "Sign me up." So of course I was the hero to everybody because like, oh, it's so it's so nice of you to, allow us to all get out of work on time, and I'm sure that most of them knew perfectly well what the deal was, but it worked out. But that's what a good manager does: figure out who does what, stick them in the slots. She was a good manager, but even with a good female manager, there were those elements of lack of accountability. Weren't a whole lot of decisions to be made, to be honest. No wonder why you hate Californians. I don't hate Californians. I don't like what they've done to their state. The only reason I was a bit negative on Californians was when I went to Bucknell University on the East Coast. I went. Here's another business story I'll tell in a second. He said, "The Dark Lord owns the night." Hold on to that thought. So, anyhow, I go to Bucknell University, and I'm from Minnesota. There's very few people from Minnesota, and there were more people from California, and so there was this little figure skater that I was friends with from California, and it was so annoying how all the California people could not see each other without greeting each other with this enthusiastic California buddy. Like all people from California were California buddies. It was this weird thing that I didn't realize that, hey, we come from the same state. That makes us buddies here or something. It was it was it was so bad and so annoying that I ran into the one girl who was also from Minnesota. And the thing is, we even knew of each other before we went to the same university out east, because she had dated the guy who was the quarterback of my high school football team. So I mean, we didn't know that we were both going to Bucknell, and I'd never actually met her in person, but I knew her name, and so anyhow, it was kind of funny because uh, we ran into each other, and she looked at me and gave this rather sarcastic smile and said, "Hey, Minnesota buddy." I just laughed because I knew perfectly well she was making fun of the Californians. Of course, the Californian with me at the time didn't pick up on that, which made it even funnier. But um, anyhow, the Dark Lord owns night thing. That was what was. This might amuse some of you, at least the Dread Ilk. Some of you will have heard this story before, but um, as you know, in Minnesota, it gets dark early. I mean, by 4 p.m., it's pitch black, pitch dark, full night. And anyhow, for whatever reason, uh, I really kind of, they talk about like getting a second wind or whatever. When I get tired and that sort of thing, I tend to get a second wind after dark. So like you get kind of tired in the afternoon, or a bit low G, and you need that afternoon cup of coffee or whatever. Um, for whatever reason, just uh, there's something about when it gets dark that just like acts. It makes me feel like I've had 2 cups of coffee or something. So anyhow, um, where we worked was, I had an office, but then there was this like big open space, like probably 60 to 100 square meters. It was really big, and that's like where there's all cubicles all along the wall in front of these windows, and the windows were big windows open to the parking lot, and the parking lot often wasn't that well lit. At least not until like 5 o'clock or something when people were getting off. So anyway, I walked out of my office. I didn't know what time it was. I've been working, and I walked out of my office, and it was just looking out. It felt like being in a submarine or something, because just looking out all these windows, this huge frame of windows, it was just pure black, and it was kind of startling because I was under the vague impression that it was afternoon. So to walk out and then just have this, and it was funny because it just really filled me with this energy. And I apparently I just took a I saw it and I stopped and I took a deep breath and I was just like, you know, kind of like the way I suppose that morning people greet the sun or something, At least I've seen commercials where, the person goes outside on their deck and they see the sun rising and they have their cup of coffee and then they just take a deep breath and smile and all that sort of thing. Anyhow, that's what it was like for me, only because the sun had set. And there are these two secretaries that were working in the cubicles there, and they both started laughing. And I said, "What's so funny?" And one was like, "That was like the creepiest thing I've ever seen." It's like, you visibly get energy from it being night. And I was like, I guess I do. But, that's what being a night owl is. I mean, um, some people, some people are morning people, and I'm glad that somebody is, but it's just not me. You know, I mean, what time is it now? It's after 2 a.m. here, and I'm toying with the idea of grabbing another cup of coffee after this is over. So, anyhow, the point is to return to the subject, the impossibility of equality. Well, one aspect of the impossibility of equality is that it is totally impossible to have a society that is equally respectful of male preferences and female preferences. Because if you give in to the female preferences, you will absolutely lose the ability to maximize the performance of men. And keep in mind, we have completely, utterly, and totally restructured our societies economically in the interest of trying to maximize labor and capital. Well, this severing, this lack of respect for male preferences, forcing men to choose between working in a predominantly female environment and just not doing the job, men will, apparently almost every single time, prefer not to do the job. But women don't want to do that job either, which means it's not going to get done. Rollo calls it the feminine primary social order. Yeah, the feminine primary social order cannot make efficient use of male labor because the men won't do what they otherwise want to do. They won't go into the army. They won't manufacture stuff. They won't grow things. They just won't. And so the choice we face is, whose preferences do we limit? Sales type guys will still do jobs after having seen women mostly do it. That may be. But a sales guy is generally pretty much left alone to sell. I suspect that if you make them... I suspect that if you fully feminize the sales force, take away commissions, if you take away commissions, you take away competition, you take away all the stuff that they like. There's probably one more coming. If you take away all of the male aspects of sales, the sales guys will walk too. I mean, how many men do you think would stick around in a sales force where they weren't allowed to receive commissions for performance? I very much doubt it. And so, this is a fundamental choice. Now, obviously, the traditional choice has been to repress female preferences. And as it's turned out, that is the wise thing to do, because I mentioned this on the blog site. Society has given in to every single one of the expressed female preferences. Every single one. And yet, it hasn't made women happy. But it has caused men to flee education. It's caused men to flee entire professions and fields. And now those and one of the results are We're just not seeing the same level of production. We're not seeing the same level of service, and we won't. It's only going to get much, much worse because a lot of young men have decided, you know what? If I don't get married and if I don't have kids, I don't need very much to sustain my quality of life. I can get by doing as little as possible, play video games, watch sports, and frankly, live a higher quality of life than a lot of men 2-3 generations ago who had good jobs and provided for their families, and the highlight of their week was to sit around and watch a football game or two. Well, now, if you don't accept any responsibilities, then you can essentially live the ideal life of the 1950s husband without doing anything all the time. Sam says, as you say, the deltas need to have the prospect of having a good life, and since women don't prefer deltas, you take away their incentive. Precisely. And so the lesson here is that either male preferences will be denied or female preferences will be denied. Every society faces that choice, and every society that makes the wrong choice is going to fail in the end. On Box Day, this is the Darkstream.